think we'll hear in quite a bit more detail about some very interesting examples. And we'll start with Rakhee, who's going to be sharing with us what Jacqueline would be saying if she were here.
Thanks, Regan. I'm sorry that Jacqueline cannot be here with us because, and we wish her well. She's not well, as Mike has mentioned earlier. But it gives me great pleasure. Can you hear?
I think they're all on.
Hello? Thank you. So it gives me great pleasure to share her remarks with you. And so these are the words of Jacqueline Pitangui. I understand that we gather here today to discuss both conceptual and pragmatic advances in facing one of the most difficult challenges of change, which is the redefinition of concepts whose meanings have crystallized over the centuries into rigid frameworks. This redefinition implies changes in the balance of power affecting laws, traditions, the interpretation of religions, culture, interpersonal relations, as well as the relations between groups, communities, and nations. In my presentation, I will highlight the role of civil society, and particularly of women's organizations, in reshaping gender relations, redefining concepts, and influencing the human rights language, both at the national and international levels. I will focus mainly on the experience of Brazilian activists. Human rights are related to the dynamics of social relations and political processes, which respond to the variations in its scope and content. Backlashes or advancements in the human rights language should be understood in reference to the historical process that underlines the statement of such rights in laws, conventions, and treaties, and determines the national and international parameters of a formal citizenship. For women, democracy refers not only to the full exercise of citizenship in the public sphere, but also to its practice in everyday life, at work, in family, in health, sexuality, and education. In this sense, women's struggle for democracy is also a struggle to redefine democracy itself. Women in different societies and at different points in time have been, and still are, less entitled to formal rights. Also, even in contexts of formal equality, they are often second-class citizens when it comes to the interpretation and implementation of legislation. The way violence against women is dealt with by the judicial system of many countries is a clear example. While homicide is usually considered a crime and punished, culture and religion sometimes see so-called honor killings and passion crimes as legitimate actions and thus not punishable. Women have faced the challenge to question this dual interpretation of laws when it comes to domestic and sexual violence. And while there is still a long way ahead, women have achieved important changes in legislations, in the punitive system, and in the role that culture plays in relegating violence against women to a socially accepted behavior. Women have also struggled in the UN arena, developing joint transnational coalitions so that international and regional conventions, such as CEDAW, and the OAS Inter-American Convention to Prevent, Punish, and Eradicate Violence Against Women, known as the Belém do Pará Convention, reaffirm that violence against women is a human rights violation. These conventions influence national legislations and public policies. By reconceptualizing violence, feminists have also faced the challenge to enlarge the meaning of peace, crystallized into the narrow traditional military definition that sees peace as synonymous with the absence of war. Feminists have redefined peace by including the crucial dimensions of gender relations in its realm, pointing out that domestic and sexual violence are obstacles to peace. One of the main contributions of the feminist perspective on peace is the relevance placed on the gender imbalance of power in the wars going on inside the homes as an impediment to a peaceful and respectful solution of domestic conflicts. As in wars between nations, where conventions, treaties should be respected as a way to solve conflicts, domestic violence must be prohibited by national legislations, public policies, and the international conventions that assure protection to the most vulnerable and punishment to the aggressors. The imbalance of power from the interpersonal to the global stands as a major obstacle to peace. In Brazil, women's movements have been struggling since the 70s to make violence against women visible, treated as a crime, and duly punished. In the 80s, the movement has struggled for the creation of special police stations for victims of domestic violence. Today, there are over 400 of these stations, which were established in response to women's denunciation of the inability of the regular police system to see this kind of violence as a crime. This advocacy work had another major victory in 1991 when the Superior Tribunal of Justice rejected the argument of legitimate defense of honor used in jury trials to acquit or reduce the penalties of men who murdered their wives or lovers, claiming that they did so to defend their honor. The 1988 Constitution in Brazil, which marks the redemocratization of the country after 2 decades of military authoritarian regime, is also a landmark in the advancement of women's rights. In this new constitution, there is a provision saying that the state has the responsibility to respond to conflicts in the home. Another important recent achievement is a new law in 2006 on violence against women called Maria da Penha Law, in honor of a woman who was beaten by her husband, became paraplegic, and after years of waiting for the condemnation of this man in the legal system, took her case to the Inter-American Human Rights Court that condemned Brazil for taking such a long time in solving this case. My organization, that is Jacqueline's organization, SEPIA, played a key role in forming a coalition of NGOs to advocate for this law, which adopts the broad Pelém do Pará Convention perspective in defining violence against women and also considering psychological damages and financial harm. This new Maria da Penha law creates special courts for this kind of crime. One of the major results of this new legislation, awareness of which is being raised across the country, is that it is changing the culture of impunity that surrounded violence against women. Finally, I would like to talk about another crucial challenge to change, which is that of the role of religion as an obstacle to women's human rights. Women in different countries and religious contexts develop strategies to respond to the challenge religion poses to the advancement of women's rights. I come from a country where the Catholic Church plays a major role in the sphere of power, influencing public policies and laws affecting particularly the reproductive and sexual rights of women. I do not intend to make a criticism of religion, their beliefs and dogmas. However, I express my profound disagreement with the constant influence of the churches, not just the Catholic Church, on the state, with the consequences on laws, regulations, and public policies that directly affect the lives of adolescents, men and women in particular. In Brazil, we have been defending women's rights from the church's influence in politics by emphasizing that the separation of church and state is a pillar of our democracy and should be defended by everyone, because only a secular state guarantees the freedom of religions and respect for pluralism. Thank you.